So let us start with the first one, that is the activity ratio, and this gives us the utilization of the assets of the firm. So if you talk about the assets, this activity ratios can be looked at from two things, two point of view. One, we have the working capital related assets. So this could be inventory or receivables, or on the liability side we have the accounts payables. So there is one way to look at is the working capital, and the second one is the fixed assets. So we can look at utilization of both of them one by one. In order to understand working capital related utilization, it is best for us to understand how the company generates cash within the system. Now, when we talk about a company, the company will expose themselves into various transactions which will relate to cash inflows and cash outflows. But during an operation of the business, the first thing that the company will have to do would be to purchase raw material. So when they purchase raw material, what will happen is this is basically a cash outflow. Why this company would like to purchase raw material? Obviously they are in a process of making a product, and they may require raw materials to produce products which can be sold in the market. So obviously this is required. So this would lead to cash outflows. Now once the raw material is purchased, obviously this will be processed and this will be converted into finished product. So now we have the finished goods, so it's ready to sell. So ultimately there would be a selling process that will happen, and during this selling process there can be two things that can actually take place. One, that this selling can be cash selling. This would mean that you have sold the finished product and you have received cash upfront. Or second, it could be a credit sales. So credit sales would mean that the client or the customer will pay you after a certain point in time. So if this was a credit sales, it would lead to the formation of receivables, and these receivables will finally convert itself into cash after a certain point in time. So what we're talking about is that this is an overall cash cycle where company faces a cash outgo initially when they purchase the raw material. Then they actually look at processing the raw material. So this raw material is essentially called as inventory. So this inventory is processed to finished work in progress to finished goods. Then finally the selling process actually takes place, and if it is cash, it is fine. If it is not cash, then receivables are formed and ultimately cash is received. So if you look at this process, let me label this one. This would be cash which goes to the raw material purchase. Number two, this could be related to the processing of the raw material. So this would be inventory turning into work in progress to finished goods. Then finally third could be related to selling the product for cash or making it into receivables and then receiving cash. One thing we should also remember is that while the company is also purchasing raw materials from its suppliers, they can also command some kind of credit. So it can also lead to two kinds of things again. One, there can be immediate cash outflow, or you may have received some credit from your suppliers as well. So like what your customers had done for your finished product, likewise you may have done the same for your suppliers. So when we talk about 1, 2 and 3, 1 being the transaction related to the purchase of raw material, 2 being the transaction related to the processing of the raw material to the finished product, and 3 being completing the selling process and receiving cash. So this whole cycle is called as a cash conversion cycle. Now let's take an example of company A, which has a policy of paying its suppliers in, let's say, 45 days. So step 1, they take 45 days to pay suppliers. Number 2, I'm talking about the second part where inventory is converted into WIP to finished goods. Maybe this company takes 90 days to process. Number 3, and the third process is basically selling process and converting the receivables into cash. So on an average, let's say they take another 60 days to convert receivables into cash. So what will be this company's cash conversion cycle? So we're talking about this cash conversion cycle here. In this scenario, cash conversion cycle will be 60 days plus 90 days minus 45 days. So this will come out to be 105 days. This 105 days actually imply that company A takes almost 105 days to purchase the raw material from that point to producing and processing in the form of the inventory to finally completing the selling process. The whole cycle of generating cash from scratch actually takes 105 days for the company. So the next question is basically, is a higher cash conversion cycle desirable or lower cash conversion cycle is desirable? So think about it. This 105 actually denotes directly and indirectly that your system is taking 105 days to generate cash. So if it takes 365 days, do you think it is desirable? Obviously this is not a desirable situation to look at. Lower the cash conversion cycle, better it is. So that's what we must kind of try.